Okay, welcome to our class Experiencing Tanach. The goal of this class is to take our skills that we learn in different Livnos classes that we've had and to use them in order to deepen our perspective of what's taking place in the different stories in Tanakh and to focus on the aspects of the stories that reveal the experience of what the people in Tanakh were going through. If it was a story where there was, a lot of, let's say, physical challenges, or there was a fear for their physical safety, to understand what they were going through, what were the emotions they were experiencing, how did they confront these challenges, right? And in order to see, like, these were real people in Tanakh, they went through real challenges. They had real experiences, right? Experiences that were major and historic, and also experiences that were day-to-day living, right? They had physical, danger that they confronted. They had happy celebrations. They had all different kinds of experiences that we have in our own lives, right? We have things that we go through as a nation, as a people, right? Throughout history, there have been so many periods of major celebration, right? And there have been periods with a lot of struggle and intense experiences. As in our own lives, right? We have things that we celebrate so many different kinds of accomplishments, whether it's something, again, like having children, getting married, right? Doing different things that are exciting and important. We also have things in our own lives which are just kind of day-to-day life, dealing with maybe someone who drains us emotionally, or dealing with maybe a friend who, constantly expects us to help them with something, right? We have so many different kinds of experiences that we experience as people. And again, whether it's national, whether it's individual, there's so many different challenges or happy things that we constantly confront. We have, again, it could be something day to day that's just kind of hard and draining. It could be something day to day which is exciting and that we look forward to. It could be something, again, that's a major life event. It could be something which is not a major life event, right? All of these, we have so many different experiences that we have every second of our lives. We're experiencing so many things, so many emotions, right? We're constantly having to respond, right, to all of these different moments, whether again it's a happy moment or a difficult moment. We're constantly supposed to respond to these experiences as Torah Jews. And so the goal of this class is to focus on what the characters in Tanakh were going through as a way of understanding how to live our own lives as Avdei Hashem, right? How are we supposed to, we know that we're supposed to emulate the, the tzaddikim and tzidkanios in Tanakh. And in order for us to do that, we have to really understand what were they going through? What were they experiencing? What were they confronting? What were they celebrating? And only once we understand what they were experiencing, we can then see how did they respond? How did they react? Right? What did they do in that situation? What is the proper way of experiencing that situation? What are the right emotions? What are the right behaviors? And all of that we can only learn from once we again focus on the stories in Tanakh properly. So that is the goal of this class, is to really experience Tanakh along with the people that we're going to discuss. And again, to focus not just on the overall story, but on the minute by minute emotions that they must have been feeling, and the real danger that they were confronting, or what were they celebrating, what were they excited about. Maybe it's not always what we originally thought. So what we're going to discuss today first is why is it that often when we learn Tanakh, we don't really have an emotional experience, right? I think it's most of us probably would say that most of the time when we learn Tanakh, when we learn the Parsha, whatever it is we're learning, we're not having an emotional experience. We're not coming away totally changed, right? It's you know it's something we do. We find it interesting. We learn a lot of nice things, and then we maybe don't feel a real difference in who we are or really connect to on an emotional level. And so what I want to discuss today is, why is that? Why don't we feel the experience of what was taking place? And why is it that we sometimes have a hard time learning from these stories? And then we're going to see how we can change that. Okay. And hopefully in this class, what we're going to do is gain those skills in order to be able to learn Tanakh in a way that's, again, is an emotional experience. It's a real experience. It's an experience, right? It's not just something that's in the intellectual realm and we learn a bunch of mefarshim and we analyze and we do it very precisely. And that's something which is so important. That's the first step, right? Every class in Livnos is about learning precisely, learning the Torah properly. This is a godly text. It is precise. It has to be learned with precision. And it is to some degree, it is an intellectual process, but it can't be limited to the intellectual realm. The goal of Torah is to enter who we are and to transform us, and that we walk away, we're different people. And it's not, again, it's partly intellectual, but it's also emotional. And we have to be there with our full selves. The Torah requires us that we are fully into it, and the experience that we have, it penetrates every aspect of who we are. And again, it transforms who we are, and we walk away, we're different people. And we're people who are more closely connected to Hashem, and our behavior and our thoughts and our emotions, all of that are more in line with Torah, with how the Torah expects us to behave. Okay, so let's discuss, why is it, well, first of all, why is it important to go through this process? It's not just because it's exciting, it's going to be fun. The emotional piece is, it's exciting, right? It's nice to see that aspect as well, but it's not just for the pleasant aspect. It's because, again, that is the essence of what Torah is. Torah is there to change who we are. And when we don't add that part in, when we just treat Torah as something intellectual, then it's missing something. It's not proper. It's not what Torah is. So we have to make sure that when we're learning these stories, it's not just, okay, one step is intellectual, one step is emotional, maybe we'll get there. No, it's that every part of us has to be a part of this process. Otherwise, there's something missing. The Torah learning itself, it's not complete. And we're not really going to, even the intellectual piece, we're not going to understand what's taking place. And we're not going to fulfill that process of Torah learning, which requires us to be more Torah people. That's a requirement of the process of Torah learning. Okay, so why is it that we don't always experience the story properly? Or we don't always understand the story properly. And again, we then don't necessarily take out the lessons which transform who we are. Okay, anyone want to weigh in? Okay, I'll start us off and then anyone can weigh in if they want. Okay, so first of all, I think one of the main problems is, this is something which comes from the Leket Zichos Musar, which we are going to quote a lot in this class. The Leket Zichos Musar has been quoted, I think, in other courses as well. Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Sher was part of Slobodka, and he has that Slobodka way of learning that, again, we've discussed in other classes, and we will discuss a little bit in this class as well. But one of the things he discusses at the beginning of his Sefer, Leket Zichos Musar, is that we learn Torah as children, and we have a certain understanding of what's taking place in the stories. And okay, fine. Children, we learn stories in a certain way. Everything's kind of black and white, right? There's the good person, the bad person, right? Everything's very extreme, right? Children don't understand nuances. Okay, great. We are going to discuss some of those comments. Thank you for sharing. Okay, we'll discuss some of those in a minute. Okay, so the first thing that we discussed is that, again, so children, right, learn stories in a certain way. And again, everything's very black and white. And that's how it is, right? Children haven't yet matured. They don't have the understanding to understand nuances. And so the proper way of teaching them Torah is with a certain amount of black and white, right? That's what they can understand. And things are very, extreme and surface level. And again, children, to the degree that they can understand, that's how we teach them the stories. What happens is that very often that idea gets cemented in our brains, right? And we just continue to build on that immature, childish understanding of the stories. And it remains really essentially an immature way of understanding the story, right? Every time we build on the stories of the Avos or of Yaakov and Esav or of Shvatim and the Shvatim and Yosef, all of that we're building off of the foundation that we gained as children, or again, everything was black and white. Oh, Yosef and the brothers, they sold their brother because they were jealous, right? And everything gets kind of cemented in our minds that way, in a way that's really, it's childish. And it's it's supposed to be that way as children because that's what children understand. But eventually we have to mature our understanding. So what the Leket Sichos Musar says is that the job of a Torah person who wants to learn the stories in the Torah is to, as they mature as a person and their perspective and understanding matures, they're supposed to go back to the stories in Tanakh and start with a clean slate, right? Start again, relearn the story from the beginning, now with a more mature perspective. And that way we'll actually be able to see what was taking place in the story as adults, as mature people, as thinking people. Right? But when we have that in our minds, like we see Esav as some like red devil, he's like the second he was born, he already looked like, a major Russia, right? So then we think like, oh, that's what Esav was. He was the devil, right? He was just like some like, terrible, evil, person. He was like the symbol of evil. But actually, when you learn the Chazals on Yaakov and Esav, you see that, and the Psukim, even themselves, but also with the Chazal, then you start to see that it wasn't even so simple to differentiate between Yaakov and Esav. Until they reached a certain point in their lives, people couldn't even tell the difference between who they were spiritually. They seemed to both be on the same madrega. And again, that's a lot more that we can discuss, and the Leket Zichros Musar does discuss that. So you can look up those sources yourself. But Yaakov and Esav, that's a very different view of the story, right? As children, again, when we draw pictures and everything, right? It's like Esav is again this like red symbol of Rishus, right? But when you actually learn the story, you start to see that that's not what was going on at all, right? There was actually a lot more. The drama was much deeper. Esav, if you met Esav, you would see someone who is a Talmid Chacham, who's a tzaddik. If Esav showed up today, we would immediately make him the Gadol Hador, no questions. There would be no question about that. Because Esav, who he was, the way he presented himself, the way he behaved, was actually in many ways not that different than Yaakov. What was different? What was different is that Esav didn't reach the potential of who he could have been. He grew up in the house of Avram, Yitzchak, right? The Imahos. He should have been someone who reached the level of Yaakov. He should have been worthy of growing up in that house. And instead, Esav, he didn't quite fulfill his potential. If you were to compare Esav to anyone today in terms of who he is, then there'll be no question. Esav would be on a much higher level. But Esav, compared to Esav could be, he didn't do enough. And therefore, we call him Esav HaRasha. He is a Rasha because he didn't fulfill his potential. He grew up, he knew Avraham. He knew Avraham. He should have been on the level of someone who knew Avraham. That's an amazing thing to have known Avraham. Esav should have reached a higher level. He didn't. Therefore, he's a Rasha because he did not fulfill his potential. But again, if he were to show up today, we would make him the Gadol Hador because Esav, if you looked at it from a human perspective, if you were there, if you were experiencing what was taking place, then you would not be able to tell the difference between Yaakov and Esav. That's a very different perspective on these stories. And it means that we would have to go back and relearn all of the interactions between Yaakov and Esav, all of the behaviors that the Torah records about Esav. We would have to relearn all of those because Esav is not some devil-like creature. Esav was someone who could have been one of the Avos. And because he wasn't one of the Avos, he didn't fulfill his potential. And therefore, Esav ends up with the end that he has, right? He's not part of the Jewish people and he doesn't continue the legacy of Avram's house. But to just dismiss him and to think that, oh, they just dismissed him. He was like, he was that child who he was off the derech and they were just, they had to throw him out. No, it's a completely different story. It's something much deeper, and all of the stories taking place that surround Esav are much deeper, much more intense, much more real than how we originally thought of them as children. Okay. And this class is going to be, thank you, it's much more subtle, right? The interactions taking place reflect much more subtle differences, um, much more, again, nuances, right? All of those, they don't exist when we're children, but we have to become more mature. You have to understand, again, Yosef and the Shvatim, it's much more subtle what was taking place. These weren't like jealous and, they just couldn't get past their jealousy, so they sold their brother. No, these are the Shiftei Ka, right? We know that Shvatim, they were tzaddikim, right? And the way the Torah talks about them is as tzaddikim. So clearly there's more going on to these stories than just, people who are just like all acting like crazy. No, there's things that are taking place. It's much more subtle. And it's the job of us as Torah Jews who want to learn from these people to actually delve into what was going on, what's the reality of what was taking place. Now, a lot of what we just discussed has to do with the Gadlus Adam approach um, to learning Tanakh, which is, again, that's a big theme in Liv Knows. And I'm happy to direct anyone who's interested to other classes that have discussed that approach. So it's something I don't want to just go into in this class again, but we will reference it from time to time because it's important and it's an essential approach when learning Torah. And so we will reference it at times and we will go into it a little bit as we discuss different stories. And that brings me really to another reason why we don't learn the stories properly and experience it along with the characters. And that's because we don't always have the right perspective, right? Not just as we mentioned so far that we learn certain things as children and then we don't mature our understanding. But there's another piece, which is that part of learning Torah is not just knowing how to analyze a Rashi, which we've done a lot in Livnos, right? Or knowing how to, translate the psukim, how to be very precise. What does a Kriyan Siv mean? What does the Trup tell us, right? It's not just knowing how to analyze the actual piece of text that we're dealing with. That's obviously very important, but that's not enough when it comes to learning Torah. We need to have the right overall perspective and how to approach the Torah text. And what I mean here is, let's say, the Gadlus Adam approach, right? The understanding that these people in Tanakh, they were great. They were great people, and we can't relate to them. If we try to view their interactions and their behaviors according to our understanding, to our experiences, we're going to limit the greatness of who these people were. The people in Tanakh were on a level we can't understand and we really can't relate to. We're going to talk about that more. But these were people, they were giants. And they were Nevi'im, right? It was a time of Nevuah. It was a time when the Beis Hamikdash was there, right? There were so many times they actually witnessed Hashem's presence in a way that we can't understand at all. And the reason that they had this experience of Hashem's revelation is not just because it was handed to them, but because they were worthy of it. They were worthy of experiencing and of knowing things that we can't even imagine what it's talking about, right? So these people in Tanakh were on a much higher level than we are. And when we learn the stories, as we just mentioned, really, when we learn the stories, we need to have this right perspective. Otherwise, we're going to miss what's taking place, right? If we look at the story of the Chet HaEgel, and we think that these people, like, oh, okay, they served a golden calf. Like, what? Hold on a second. These were people. They came out of Mitzrayim. They saw the Makos. They had an amazing education of Hashem's presence in this world, of Hashem's power, of Hashem's authority, right? They witnessed all of that firsthand, right? That's an amazing thing. And then they come to Har Sinai and they saw what happened at the Yam Suf, right? And again, we know that everyone at the Yam Suf experienced a level of nevuah, a revelation of Hashem that was greater even than what Yechezkel saw in the Maaseh Merkava, right? It's an amazing thing. It's something we can't even understand what these Chazals are talking about. But what the Jewish people experienced at the Yam Suf, the revelation of Hashem, was a historic moment in history, right? And again, something that we can't even comprehend what was going on. Then they came to Har Sinai and they were given the Torah. They weren't just given the Torah because, oh gosh, Hashem had to find some people to hand it. No, these were people who were worthy of standing at Har Sinai. They were worthy of sitting at seeing a revelation of Hashem. I mean, it's like, again, we can't even go into it because it's hard to understand what this means. We have no ability to understand what this means, even to some tiny piece. Like, we have no idea. So here these people were at Har Sinai. They received the Torah. They experienced this revelation of Hashem. And then 40 days later, they serve a golden calf. That doesn't make any sense, right? That doesn't make any sense. I think even all of us here can agree that serving a golden calf would be absurd. And yet, none of us ever received nevuah. None of us had any revelation of Hashem. None of us are worthy of standing at Matan Torah. We don't even know what these things are talking about. We don't even live at a time when anyone gets nevuah. We have no idea what any of this means. And yet, when we look, it's absurd to have served the Chet HaEgel. So if we come to the story with that perspective, we're going to learn about a bunch of, I guess, absurd people who did something absurd. And what's the lesson that comes out of it? Don't serve a golden calf. Okay, so everyone, now you learned the story of the Chet HaEgel. Don't serve a golden calf. That's really going to transform who we are, right? And it's going to change. And wow, that was so important for us to know. No, that would be the lesson there would be, okay, kind of like a joke. None of us would really need to hear it. And okay, we'd move on with our lives. But actually, none of that is what took place, because obviously these people who witnessed the Makos, who witnessed Yam Suf, who witnessed Har Sinai, did not go and serve a golden calf, because that would be crazy. What happened is it's much more deep. And I don't want to go now into the whole other aspect. Maybe we'll do that piece in this course. But what was taking place at the Chet HaEgel was not something absurd. And it was not serving a golden calf. It was not an abandonment of Hashem in order to serve some other idol. No, none of that makes any sense. Right? When they were doing the Chet HaEgel, and they said, right, this is your God who took you out of Mitzrayim. Obviously, they knew that this golden calf was not the one who took them out of Mitzrayim. Obviously, they knew that, right? All of that would be absurd if we look at it that way. But when we look at it deeper, there's actually a lot more taking place. What this golden calf symbolized it wasn't supposed to be an abandonment of Hashem. And again, the Mefarshim, there's a lot of different ways we could understand the story, but just like a quick answer to what was going on is that actually the Egel was supposed to be some way for them to connect to Hashem. And according to a lot of Mefarshim, it was actually supposed to be the Mishkan. They wanted to build a Mishkan. What is the Mishkan? The Mishkan is a place in this world where we can go and focus on connecting to Hashem, right? And we as physical beings who live in a physical world, right, we go to the Mishkan to have an experience of being closer to Hashem and to go through a process where we transform ourselves and we become more Torah Jews. And then, we go back into our lives and we bring all of what we've experienced with us. So here, when they were building the Egel, what they wanted to do was to create a Mishkan, a place in this world where Hashem's presence rests, right? Whatever that means, but it's a place where it's a symbol of serving Hashem. And then they could go and use the Egel as a way of connecting to Hashem, and again, use that as the focal point in this world of where Hashem's presence is seen more obvious, where it's more present, right? So when they served the Chet HaEgel, what they were saying is, we want to connect to Hashem, we want to build a Mishkan. And they weren't supposed to do that because they hadn't yet received the instructions to build the Mishkan, which they received soon after, right? So there are many Mefarshim who actually go through and who show how the Egel and the Mishkan were very, very similar. That the Egel was supposed to be a way of building a Mishkan. That's completely different. So here, if we look at this story, here were these people, they so badly wanted to connect to Hashem, who they had a relationship with, a real relationship. They had really experienced Hashem's presence. And now they wanted to build a Mishkan, which is something which exists in the Torah, right? It's something which the Torah wants us to do, except it wasn't the right time. So they built a Mishkan, but it was too early. It was before they had received the instruction. Now, if that's what they did wrong, they were too excited. They had so much zrizos. They wanted to build the Mishkan as soon as they could. And then it ended up being a major chait. Major chait. So then we would ask the question, then what's the lesson? What was going on here? How in our own lives are we so excited to do a mitzvah and maybe we do it a little bit too early? Maybe we do it before it's appropriate, or maybe we do it in a way that's not appropriate. Is it possible that we too are, out of our love for Hashem, trying to serve Him in a way that's maybe not appropriate? And that's something which is a serious lesson, right? Hold on a second. Where in our lives do we do things where we think we're serving Hashem, but we're not? We're doing something maybe that's against halacha. Maybe in some way it's not appropriate, even though we think we're doing what's appropriate, right? That's a subtle lesson. That's an important lesson. It's a relevant lesson. And when we take that kind of story and we really delve into it and we really understand the lesson that was taking place, and again we think, we consider it, we really consider what they were doing, right? Then we're able to think, where in our lives do we do the same thing? Do we make the same mistake? Right? And once we consider that, we can start making changes in our own lives, right? What the Cheta Egel taught us is that there's a lot of times when we think we know what's best, right? They wanted to build a Mishkan and they had an idea how to do it. And so they made the Egel. However, it was not appropriate. It was supposed to be in line with Hashem's instructions, not their own. How often in life do we do things as a way of serving Hashem, but instead of being loyal to what the Torah tells us to do, we substitute our own judgment. We know better. We have a better idea. Okay, the Torah says to do it like that, usually. But you know what? We're going to do it our own way because we know, right? This situation, oh, it's a little different, it's a little this. We have a better idea, right? There are so many times when we substitute our own judgment instead of following the Torah, instead of following Hashem's judgment, which is so much smarter than our own, right? But we do that. And again, all of this is subtle, right? I don't think most of us wake up in the morning and we say, you know what, today I'm going to serve Hashem, I'm going to break halacha. And that way I'm going to do it even better than the Torah tells us. It's not like that, obviously. Obviously, no one's thinking that, right? But we might not be so careful. We might, we might in some subtle, deep something inside of us not really agree with what the Torah said to do, and we find reasons to do it our own way. We have all the, okay, we'll do it mostly the way the Torah says, but maybe and again, all this is it's subconscious, right? It's not going to be obvious. It's not going to be glaring out at us, right? But it's something which perhaps we're not as careful to make sure that we're only following the Torah instead of substituting our own judgment. Okay. So all of this was, again, what's one of the reasons that we don't often experience the stories of Tanakh properly and then learn the stories is because, again, we don't have the right perspective. One of the perspectives that we need is the Godless Adam approach, the greatness of the people in Tanakh, who these people actually were. And if we don't start off with the right perspective on who they were, we're going to totally miss the story, totally miss the story. Again, even if we, know how the precision of every pasuk, but if we don't understand the underlying what's motivating this whole story, we're going to miss the point. And again, there are other perspectives also, right, that we have to keep in mind. There's a way of learning Torah properly. There's an approach to learning Torah, and it's our responsibility when we learn Torah to bring in the general Torah perspective, right, that is, again, part of every story in Tanakh. Okay. Let's see some of the answers that we've gotten. What's another reason why we don't always experience the stories properly? Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so let's do another general approach. One of the things that I think often limits our ability to relate to what was going on or to really experience it is that we don't really see these as being real people, right? It seems like it's some sort of fairy tale. It's a lot of the events seem kind of dramatic, right? Or they seem like they happened so long ago to completely, different kinds of people. The context is so different. And maybe in some way deep down, we almost don't really see these stories as having actually taken place, right? We're so used to reading novels and fairy tales and all these things that maybe in some way we don't really relate to these as real people, which of course they are. So one of the ways that we can ensure that when we learn, we do relate to these as real people and we relate to what they're going through, is to, first of all, when you learn a story in Tanakh, stop throughout the story and consider what they were going through, right? Don't just like, skim through the story and then move on. But think like, when this person said that, when Avram and Sarah were talking, like when Avram said something, how might Sarah have understood that? Right? How might that have like, what was that like for her to have heard that? And when she responded to Avram, what did that mean? What were they talking? That's maybe not a great example. But in general, throughout a story, right, everyone is experiencing the story. Everyone, again, they have emotions that they're going through. They understand the story in a certain way. Maybe they don't have the same information, right? Avram and Sarah, they were both Nevi'im, and they were receiving certain messages from Hashem, but they didn't both have the same information, and they weren't receiving the same messages. So as they were interacting with each other, what they might have been talking about, they weren't both working off of the same premise, right? How might that have influenced their interaction? How might each of them have come to that interaction and experienced it, right? When Avram and Sarah received the news that they would have a son, we know that they experienced it in a different way. Why? Because Avram had been promised, he knew that they were supposed to have a son together, and Sarah did not have that promise, right? She didn't yet know that promise, and so she was shocked to hear a message that she would have a son. That was shocking to her. She wasn't expecting that, right? So both of them experienced that story differently. And there were different interactions that took place throughout that story. And each person is working off, again, the information they have, the emotions they have, right? There's a lot going on. It's a shocking story. Avram and Sarah are here. They were unable to have a child. And all of a sudden, these three men show up and say, you're going to have a child, right? This is like a shocking story. Well, how is Sarah supposed to understand this? How's Avram supposed to understand this? They didn't know that these people were angels, right? They weren't told, oh, by the way, Rashi, lets us know that these were actually angels and Chazat. No, they were living the story in real time, right? So here, what was taking place, like, what was this experience like to have three men show up and tell you you're going to have a child? You were unable to have a child until now you're going to have a child. Like, think about what was actually going on there, right? Like, what? How are they supposed to experience this story? And so if we look through the Torah, every story taking place, there's so much going on. And what was actually, one person knows that he's really this person and one person doesn't know. And there's so much taking place. And how is each person, what is going on? What is their experience in this story? So consider again what people were going through, and don't just wait till the end, right? Don't wait until the end of the story when Avram and Sarah have a child. No, think about the decades when they weren't able to have a child. Think about all that time when they were waiting and they didn't know. Would they have a son? What would be the end, right? We see in the psukim that they weren't aware that they were going to have a son. At some points they were told or things like that, but most of the time they thought, maybe this is it. We're never going to have a child. Our job is to teach Torah. That's it. We're not going to have our own child to continue on the legacy of the Torah, right? So think about what that was like. Don't just skip to the end, but think about the years of struggle that they wanted to have a child. They wanted to have a child to serve Hashem. That was the reason they wanted a child. But all those years when they were unable to have a child, that was many, many years with no end in sight. They had no idea what the end of the story would be. We know what the end is, so we just, oh, okay, whatever. They struggled and then they had a child. But think about the years. First of all, years, but also years where it seemed like, I guess this is it. We're never going to have a child. And it was then think about the shock, the excitement when they did have a child, right? Experience the story with them. And that's a big piece of this also is not just experiencing the story as it happens, but remembering that they didn't know the end, right? We know the end, so we're able to just kind of skip and the whole story kind of becomes very whatever because we know the end, right? But think about it, what it was like to go through the story and not know the end. Think about the story of Purim. When the Jewish people, they didn't know that it would be a miraculous salvation, right? They didn't know that. We know that. So we go to Shul and we enter Shul and we're already celebrating and we're excitement and we're going to eat good food and we're going to have fun and we're going to send mishloach manos and we're going to have a great time. So we're all excited and we're dressed up and we're ready to bang when Haman comes, right? And we're like, the whole thing is exciting and it's fun. But think about what it was like for the Jewish people at the time when there was a decree, we're going to completely destroy the Jewish people. And Mordechai, the Gadol Hador, was telling them, we got to do tshuva because this is not just a decree from some crazy guy. This is not just a decree in the physical world, but actually this decree is coming from from Shamayim, right? This is something we are deserving of being completely destroyed. And if we don't do something quick, it's not going to be a good ending. This was a serious moment in history. This was a moment, again, in every realm, there was a decree of destruction of the Jewish people. So here it was, the Jewish people were facing genocide. It was terrifying. It was terrifying. And the only reason the Jewish people survived that moment in history is because they came together and they said, we need to beg Hashem. We need to do tshuva. We need to change everything. And it was only at that moment that the Jewish people, they did those 3 days where they performed tshuva. And by the way, the tshuva was not like, oh, we're gonna fast and we're gonna chill. The tshuva was where they went to the depths of their being and they begged Hashem for mercy, and they completely changed who they were. It was a difficult time. Those 3 days, they weren't simple. Those were 3 days of torturing themselves in tshuva, of begging Hashem for mercy, of transforming themselves. And we know that they transformed themselves to such a degree that they accepted the Torah at a higher level than they had until then. That was the transformation. After 3 days of tshuva, imagine what that tshuva must have been. That after 3 days of tshuva, they reached a level of Kabbalas HaTorah that was unique in history. That's what they did. They weren't like schmoozing with the person next to them. No, the fasting, the tefillah was all about, we need to change who they were. Rav Victor Miller says, what's the difference between the story of Purim and the Holocaust? The difference is that in the story of Purim, they did tshuva because Mordechai encouraged them and he said, we need to do tshuva. So they listened to their leader and they did tshuva. He says the Holocaust, it was the same setup. It was the same setup of a decree of destruction. And the reason that the Holocaust ended up the way it did is because we didn't do tshuva and we didn't listen to the Torah leaders who were encouraging us to do tshuva. So he says Purim, they were facing a Holocaust. They were facing a Holocaust. Terrifying. Terrifying, scarier than the Holocaust, because the Holocaust, Jews were living around the world and they didn't feel like, oh wow, this is the end of Judaism. Here in the Purim story, this was it. Everyone lived under Achashverosh. It was complete destruction. Terrifying. No future for the Jewish people. But they responded in the way that they did. Amazing, heroic what they did, and they transformed one of the worst moments in history into one of the happiest, into one of really the best. It was one of the scariest moments physically and spiritually, and it became a moment of spiritually, a moment that was an amazing Kabbalas HaTorah. And physically, right, they ended up being saved, right, and being victorious over their physical enemies, right? It was an amazing moment in history. And if we don't experience it along with them, we're gonna lose the point, right? The point of Purim is not like, oh yay, we get to eat a lot of candy or have fun or get drunk, right? The point of Purim is the Jewish people at a moment in history faced the possibility, the probability of complete destruction, of the end of history. Like it was terrible. And they said, what does a Jew do in this moment? A Jew does complete tshuva to the essence of who we are. And it was only because they responded in that way. They stopped everything. And for 3 days, they just did tshuva, complete, deep, real tshuva. And then they were saved. It's a really intense story when you think about what they went through. Because we know the end, we often forget the beginning and the middle and the whole experience and the whole story. But Purim is there to teach us something which is so real, something which throughout Gullus, the Jewish people have needed that lesson so much, right? We know that Purim is there, Miguel Sester is there to teach us how to survive Gullus, right? It was there at that critical moment when the Jewish people needed these lessons. And if we ignore those lessons, chas v'chalila, terrible. But if we listen to those lessons, then the Jewish people will be successful, will be safe, and it will be a reason to celebrate like what they did at the time of Purim, right? For generations now, we still celebrate that amazing, amazing moment in Jewish history. But again, it didn't come for free, and there was an experience at the time, and it was a necessary experience, which enabled them to get to the end, the happy occasion at the end. Right? We, go through a lot of things in Gullus constantly, right? We really can relate to the pain of what they were going through, to the terror, right? The fear of what would be. And And it's not new. We're not the first people to feel that way. They experienced it throughout Jewish history. They experienced it in the time of Purim. It's an opportunity for us. It's a gift that we have to have the Megillah and to learn those lessons so that we too can be successful. And it would be so sad if we don't use that gift that was given to us. Okay. I want to continue though this idea that again that we sometimes approach these people in Tanakh like some sort of fairy tale or novel, because I think there's a lot to say about it. Um, I do think also that sometimes when we learn Tanakh, we kind of limit the range of their experiences, right? Like I think a lot of us, we go through as again as Jewish people, as a nation, and as individuals, we go through a lot of different struggles in our lives. Um, in a very big, dramatic kind of way, right? But also, most of us have a lot of day to day things that are hard. I think everyone has a lot of day to day things which can be challenging. Again, we can have someone in our life who's kind of annoying, who maybe is, you know, someone we interact with very often. We can have somebody who, whatever it is, right? We can have something in our life maybe that's just it's just a struggle that we have to deal with every single day, right? It could be all different. I don't even want to give an example because there's just so many, right? There's so many, and each of us has something completely different, right? But there are so many struggles that each of us have every minute of our lives, whether it's dealing with other people, whether it's something internal to us, something we struggle with as our own person, whether it's something of a physical nature, an emotional nature, a spiritual nature, right? Whatever it is, each of us have so many different challenges which are coming up every minute, right? Every minute there's something that we have to address or whatever it is. It's hard. There's a lot of things coming up and it's not easy. It's not simple. And I think a lot of times we don't see those experiences as being something that the people in Tanakh also had to go through. But that's not true because the people in Tanakh were also real people and they were dealing with real things and they were living real lives. And it wasn't just that Abraham had the big flashy Akedah Yitzchak. It's that every moment of his life, he was dealing with different struggles. Um, it was not simple, right? One of the Rabbi Emmanuel Bernstein, he has a book on Agada, and in his book, he talks about the concept. It's just popping up now, so I don't, I don't, I hope I'm saying everything properly. But I thought this was really a beautiful idea when I saw it. He says that according to some opinions, Avram's 10 tests culminated in that Kedah Yitzchak. That was a major dramatic event. However, he says that according to some opinions, actually the 10th test was dealing with Ephron and burying Sarah after Sarah died. So it might seem shocking to us because it makes sense to us that Akedah Yitzchak should be the 10th test, right? It was dramatic, it was major, it was intense, right? And we would imagine that the test would get, more difficult, more intense until it culminates in something very major. Whereas the story of Ephron doesn't seem that dramatic, right? It's okay. Maybe it was a test, but it doesn't seem more difficult than Akedah Yitzchak. But Rabbi Bernstein says that actually it's not really true. Akedah Yitzchak represents the kind of thing that's like a once in a lifetime major heroic event. And a lot of times we can rise to the challenge, right? And we have okay, this is going to be a one-time event and we're going to rise to the challenge and, do what's right, obviously there's a lot more to say about that Kedah Yitzchak, right? It was a major event, right? But there's sometimes when we can say, you know what, in this next, hour, I am going to be heroic. It's going to be the most important moment of my life. I'm ready. I'm going to rise to the challenge. Whereas that was, let's say, what Kedah Yitzchak represented. Whereas Ephron, the story of Ephron is that Avram returns from Akedah Yitzchak, this major event, and he hears the sad news that Sarah passed away. And now he has to go bury Sarah. And it's a difficult time, right? This has been very emotionally intense. First, Akedah Yitzchak, first he's supposed to sacrifice Yitzchak, then he's not supposed to sacrifice Yitzchak, and this, and it's a major event. And he comes home after, okay, dealing with that event, and all of a sudden he hears that Sarah died. And that's really intense. Sarah, his partner, right? They were partners in teaching the world about Hashem, and this was his wife for a very long time, right? And all of a sudden he hears after this major event, he just passed this amazing test, only to hear the news that Sarah died. And he's dealing with all of those emotions and that pain, that confusion, right? All of that. And in the middle of this, he has to go deal with something very practical of burying Sarah. And he comes to the Bnei Ches, right, to bury Sarah. And next thing you know, he has to start dealing with this really annoying guy, Ephron. First, Ephron says you can have it for free. Then he charges him a ton of money. Then he this, then he's that. Ephron is like, he's a really annoying guy, right? He's totally not honest, right? He's totally manipulative, and he's doing all these things, and it's really, really annoying. So what happens is that here it might seem like, wow, that's amazing. Oh, Akedah sits like that's amazing. But actually, think about the test at that moment. When here Avram is, he's dealing with something really difficult in his life. Really difficult. This is a really hard time. And he's probably pretty drained. He had Akedah Yitzchak, he has Sarah passed away. I mean, this is really intense moments in his life. And he has to deal with this really annoying guy. And there's no like lights and flashing and oh, it's so exciting. This is just really annoying. Like, why? Why does he have to deal with this at this moment? It's just annoying. So Rabbi Bernstein says that actually someone being able to keep their cool and to just go through. Avram never gets upset. He never starts to get frustrated. He just does what needs to be done until he manages to successfully bury Sarah and buy Aras HaMachpelah. And he just gets through it. He doesn't get mad. He doesn't, have a meltdown. He just gets through. And if you look throughout the story, he's just calm. He's doing what needs to be done. And Rabbi Bernstein says that's really an amazing accomplishment. Because again, when there's that time when we think, you know what, I'm going to do something heroic, and for the next hour, I'm going to sacrifice, there's an ability to kind of like rise to the challenge for a short period of time. But when we're just living our lives, it's really annoying to deal with annoying people. It's really annoying. And there doesn't seem to be anything heroic about it. It's just annoying. And it's just draining. It's really annoying. And again, this wasn't something that was exciting. It was just like, why? Why does he have to deal with this? But he dealt with it correctly. And that was a greater accomplishment. Because again, it's hard to just deal in our day-to-day lives. There doesn't seem to be anything so special and so exciting. It's just annoying. And yet, our job as Torah Jews is to stay calm and is to deal with each person appropriately, in a way that's, again, emotionally healthy, right? Balanced, not to freak out, not to lose our cool, but just to stay calm. And that's really a lesson of the Torah, is how to deal with our day-to-day lives, not just the one moment in our life where it's maybe like that moment where everything comes together, but it's in the day-to-day, how to live our lives every moment properly. And so we might think that the people in Tanach, oh, all they dealt with were these like massive dramas of dying al Kiddush Hashem and this and major, but actually they were expected to live their day-to-day lives in a way that was calm, it was proper, it was according to all of halacha, it was, lifnim mishar sadin, right? It was just keeping everything properly and like the avos, worthy of the avos. And I think that's an important thing that again, we a lot of times we don't see our day-to-day experiences in what they went through. We don't relate to them in that way. But actually they were going through these things as well because they were real people. And real people have these experiences. And so the Torah also teaches us how to get through those kind of experiences, those day-to-day just annoying things that people have to go through. Well, there's a way to deal with it as a Torah Jew, and that's what the Torah is there to teach us. So again, we don't want to think that, like we can only look at the Torah when some massive event is taking place. No, everything that we experience, look to the Torah and see how did the tzaddikim and tzidkanios in the Torah deal with these situations. I think that another piece of not seeing these as real people, and again, seeing it as some sort of like novel, is that I think we often forget that in a novel, let's say, like I think about this, we love in our house like detective novels and things like that. So, when you look at a story, right, and it's giving you like, what the detective is finding, right? So it'll mention like 3 things he sees in a room, right? And of course, later on in the story, those 3 things are going to be important in telling you who the criminal is, right? And helping you solve the mystery. But in real life, if someone's a detective, right, they don't walk into a room and all of a sudden, like, the boots on the floor light up, right? It doesn't happen, right? It's real life. Like, they're probably going to miss those boots, right? Because They're not focused on the three things that the author chooses to record in a novel, right? That's the difference between a novel and real life. In a novel, every interaction that a person has all has to do with the main plot line. You don't see regular life. You only see the conversations that are directly related to the plot, which is how a novel is supposed to be, right? That's true. It's in order to tell you, the important part of the story. You don't want to hear every boring conversation they have. However, it's not a reflection of real life, right? There's more going on, obviously, in the story. And the detective is not, a doofus because he didn't notice the boots that you noticed because you were specifically told about, right? These kind of things, it wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense for someone to think that because, they can solve mysteries in a novel, that they're now able to be, they're so they're great at observing and noticing and all that kind of stuff, so therefore they can be a real detective. It doesn't work like that, right? It's completely different. It's not real life. So I think here a lot of times we forget that, again, the Torah is not going to record every single conversation that a person had, and it's not going to record every single detail, right? We know that even within a conversation in the Torah, there are certain parts of the conversation that are left out, which a lot of times Chazal fill in for us. Right? But the Torah is not going to record for you all the details of every second of everyone's life, which means that things that might seem obvious to you, it wasn't obvious at the time. And I'll give you an example. Let's just say, for example, that during the time of the Chorban, the Navi comes and he tells the Jewish people, "You have abandoned the Torah." And we look at that. I believe it's Yirmiyahu. We look at that and we think to ourselves, wow, these were terrible people. They were abandoning the Torah. And we think, you know what? Why did they do tshuva? Like, why did they do something different? Couldn't they have stopped the Korban from happening? Like, do tshuva. If you abandon the Torah, like, do something about it, right? However, it's much more complex than that. If you look, this idea is from the Or HaGanos, who was from the Alter of Slobodka. So the Or HaGanos says that actually, if you were there at the time, it would be impossible to recognize that they were doing anything wrong. Impossible. It was impossible to see. And why is it that the Navi asks this question? He says, why are the Jewish people, why is the Chorban happening? And the answer is because they abandoned the Torah. And he says, you know why the Navi had to say that? Because no one had any idea that that was taking place. Until Hashem told the Navi, they had no idea. Anyone standing there would have been shocked to hear that. Shocked. They would have no way of identifying why they were being punished. They had no idea. And the Or HaGanos goes through the greatness of who they actually were. And you see that when it says that they abandoned the Torah, they didn't abandon the Torah. The Or HaGanos goes on to explain it, and you see that their so-called abandonment of the Torah was actually their loyalty to the Torah. And if you go through the Or HaGanos, then you see how he shows that, how he proves that actually these people, they weren't abandoning the Torah all day. He says that the problem was, this is what he said, he says that the problem was that they learned Torah all the time, 24/7. So because they learned Torah 24/7, they never made a Birkas HaTorah because they never stopped and then started learning Torah again. So if you were in yesterday's class, then you heard a lot about this, right? But if a person never stops learning Torah, then technically the bracha should just continue. So they never made the bracha on learning Torah because they were learning Torah 24/7. And because they never made the bracha on learning Torah, that was a problem. And so therefore they were being punished for that. So what does the Navi says? The Navi comes and he says, you're being punished because you abandoned the Torah, which really means because you learn Torah 24/7 and therefore you never make the Birkas HaTorah, therefore you're being punished because you abandoned Torah. What? What? So if we look at these psukim and we don't delve into what Chazal tell us was actually going on, we're going to have a crazy picture. These people, they were terrible. They abandoned the Torah. Abandoned the Torah. However, if you actually look at what was taking place, these people learned 24/7 and everything in their lives were following the Torah. And it was only because they learned Torah so much and they were so loyal to the Torah that therefore it created a certain lack, which is then called abandoning the Torah. Right? It's completely different. It's completely different. So if we learn, if we learn it the first way and we say, oh, abandoning the Torah. Oh, these people, they abandoned the Torah. They were probably walking around murdering and stealing and serving Avodah Zarah, and these were terrible people. So if we think of it like that, we think, oh, it's okay. I'm not like that. It's fine. I didn't abandon the Torah. I love Torah. I learn Torah. I keep Torah. I keep kosher. I keep Shabbos. I haven't murdered anyone. I haven't served avodah zarah. Oh, I must be amazing. That's how we'll understand the story. However, if we delve deeper into it and we look at what Chazal say, Chazal tell us that's not what's going on. These people were living regular lives, completely devoted to Hashem, completely devoted to a level we can't understand. Right? I don't know anyone who literally learns 24/7 that they never have a chance to make a new bracha on learning Torah. These people were learning 24/7, 24/7. And so what they were experiencing was a complete loyalty to the Torah. And when the Navi came to them and said, "You're abandoning the Torah. If you don't do tshuva, you're going to be destroyed. The Churban's going to happen." They had no idea what he was talking about. How could they possibly have any idea what he was talking about? They weren't abandoning the Torah. They were learning 24/7. They had no idea what he was talking about. And so again, if we understand what was actually going on at the time, right, then we'll see that they didn't see this. Now, then we can learn a lesson to our time, right? We might look around and think, hey, we're doing an amazing job. We have yeshivas, we have so many institutions teaching men, women, children, adults. I mean, it's amazing. And especially today, we have Zoom. I mean, everyone's house can be 24/7 listening to Torah. It's an amazing thing. I don't know if anyone's house does have 24/7 listening to Torah, right? But it's an amazing thing. Like, how could anyone look at our time and think, like, are we not keeping Torah enough? Do we not love Torah? We have chesed organizations. We're careful with Shabbos. We're careful with all of these things. Like, how could anyone find fault in what we're doing? But what we learn from this story is whatever you think you're doing, there's more to be done. There's more. There's a little more. Even if you're learning Torah 24/7, it might not be enough. Even if you're completely devoted that literally no one can identify a single thing that that we're doing wrong, there still could be something that's not enough. It's not enough. And it needs to be more. And so we can find something in our lives. Again, we don't look at our lives and think like, oh, okay, that person's abandoning Torah, that person. No, we're working really hard. We're trying to keep Torah. And yet, if a Navi was here today and looking beneath the surface, that's what the job of the Navi was. It was to look deeper, beneath the surface of what was seeming to take place, right? But to look at the godly perspective, to look from Hashem's vantage point, things that are beneath the surface that are not always, easy to see or possible to see. And the Navi then says, you might not realize it, but there's an abandonment of Torah taking place. You need to do more. You need to work harder. It's not enough. You think it's enough, and it makes sense why you think that, but it's not enough. So again, when we look at these people as just like stories on a page, and we think that like everything that's being told to us was obvious. The people in Purim, well, they should have seen this coming because the Torah records blank. They didn't know. They didn't know because they weren't being told the same things that are now recorded. Right? When we have all these things, in the Purim story, when it tells us, oh, Hashem made Esther the queen before, the refuel of Nehamaka, right? Chazal tell us that in the Purim story, Hashem set up the refuel of Nehamaka. And what do? Right? We see that Esther was made queen before Haman ever tried to destroy the Jewish people, right? And we have all the psukim that tell us that, and the mefarshim, and the this and the that. And we say, like, didn't they see? Esther was queen. I mean, didn't they notice that? Like, didn't they notice that? But we see with Mordechai, when he talks to Esther, he says, maybe this is why you became queen. He didn't know, because he didn't have a Rashi that gives him a little comment like, oh, this is Chazal tell us refuel of Nehamak. He didn't have that, because it didn't exist. We now have that, where the Torah tells us, oh, look out for this, it's coming up, look out for this, look out for this. But in the moment, it didn't tell them that, because they were living real life. They didn't know what it meant when Esther became queen. They couldn't understand the shocking moment when Esther became queen. Like, what? What? Could you imagine if like Rebbetzin Kanievsky was all of a sudden kidnapped and made like, and all of a sudden the Palestinians kidnap her and make her like Hamas's queen? I mean, it was like, what is going on here? It was insane. They had no idea what was going on. And then the story takes place, and all of a sudden, Esther is the one who enables the Jewish people to be saved. And they didn't know that from the beginning. First of all, again, they didn't already know the story, right? But they didn't also have comments and psukim that told them, oh, by the way, Hashem is setting up the refuel of Nehamaka. They didn't know that. They had no idea what was going on because they were living real life without a commentary. They didn't have a constant commentary telling them, oh, Chazal tell us here, refuah l'fnei hamaka. They had no idea. They were living real life. So again, we live real life. We don't have a commentary that tells us, oh, by the way, you should know right now you're dealing with this annoying person in your life, but it's really setting you up so that in the future, this and no, we're just living real life with no commentary, with no psukim recording our actions. We're just living real life. And if we look at these people again as just pages, as just words, right, that tell us this happened, this is going to happen, look out for this. So then we miss that actually there was a person who was living through that, who was living through that struggle, who was living through that exciting moment. They were just living regular life. They were regular people, right? And that's, again, we have to tap into that in order to really understand what was taking place. Okay, one more piece that I want to just mention quickly is that another reason why we often misunderstand stories and don't relate to them properly is that, as we just mentioned, right, that not all the information is being told to us in the Torah, and it's the job of Chazal to fill in the missing information. Without that missing information, we have a totally incorrect understanding of what took place, right? The Torah Shebechsav is not supposed to be learned on its own, right? Chazal is there for a reason. The Torah Sheba'al Peh is there for a reason. It's to help us understand what the Torah is teaching. And if we don't use that, then we're going to miss what the Torah is actually telling us, right? It was designed to be used together, right? So because of that, it's important for us to remember we can't learn anything in Tanakh without the guidance of Chazal and the guidance of the Mefarshim, right, who are students of Chazal, right? It's again, we have to make sure, otherwise it's a completely different story than what took place. It's a completely wrong story, right? The Tanakh on its own without Chazal and Mefarshim is just incorrect, right? We need to make sure that we're learning it with the proper guidance. And again, Chazal, they have information we don't have, they have perspectives we don't have. We need their guidance in order to understand the story. Okay. And again, the whole point of all these stories is to get to that end, where we say, okay, how is this relevant to us? What's the lesson being taught here? When we go through the story with that thinking and we look and we think, what were their experiences? And how are their experiences in some way similar to something that I go through, to something that I experience? It'll change our whole view of the story. The whole story will look different to us, and it will enable us to really look and to see, like, how is this related to us, right? That perspective will make the whole learning process different and more clear. Okay, so that wraps up our introduction for this class. And again, in this class, when we go through the stories, we're going to look at the stories and we're going to look for something deeper taking place, something beyond the psukim into what Chazal and the Mefarshim tell us was taking place, and then see, like, what does the story teach us? What were these people going through, and how is that related to something that we also go through? And what is the lesson here that this story is designed to teach us? Thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to learning together and to this course. Have a great week.